Well, good morning from St. Bart's in Midtown Manhattan. My name is Peter Thompson. I serve as the vicar and interim rector here. And whether you're joining us in person on Park Avenue or online at stbarts.org, it is an absolute joy and delight to welcome you to the forum where each week we have sacred conversations about the things that matter. This morning we're going to be talking about the climate on our college campuses, a topic that's been in the news quite a lot recently, and we're joined by two of the leaders of the Episcopal Diocese of New York on our college campuses, chaplains at Manhattan universities, the Reverend Dr. Ryan Kuratko and the Reverend Megan Sanders. Ryan is the chaplain to Canterbury Uptown, which is Columbia, Barnard, and other institutions of higher learning in Upper Manhattan and the Bronx, and Megan is chaplain to Canterbury Downtown, which is NYU and other institutions of higher learning in downtown Manhattan. We're so grateful that both of you could be here. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, so I think you all wanted to say a few introductory words about who you are, what your ministry is, and what it's feeling like on college campuses today.
Hey, good morning. My name's Megan Sanders, and really grateful. Thanks for inviting us, and thank you all. I serve for Canterbury Downtown. I started about 6 months before the shutdown, and so it's been a real privilege to be in a chaplaincy setting, during like overt different times, and kind of starting off that way, and so. I think that I grew up a military civil service kid, and I moved a lot. And so one way that I feel right at home in a place that is just overtly, constantly shifting and changing is that I really identify with things, geographically moving and the faces of people changing, and yet is there still a place that I am invited to belong no matter where I am? And has somebody set that up? And so the Episcopal Diocese of New York says, yes, yeah, we have that for you. And so for the college students of any and all levels all over the 10 counties of the Episcopal Diocese of New York, we've got college chaplaincy that is saying there's a place, for you to come and belong. Kind of like when I walked in, we walked up the steps to St. Bart's this morning, and it says, there is a place for you. And so, in my experience, chaplaincy is very much that. I think that thinking about our physical and also our digital footprints, to be able to be found, people that are looking for us. I think about if I've ever been on a tour. I think about Episcopal chaplaincies or chaplaincies in general, as being the umbrella that's held up. Not everybody is looking for the umbrella, but the people that are. And so it's our way of holding up, like, here is this community, and are you seeking? Are you looking? And we do offer, we offer space. I'll say a little bit about downtown and then pass the mic. But what I love about any kind of ministry is that, yes, we have what we offer, and then also we just never know who's going to show up day to day. That's true in a parish setting, that's true in chaplaincy settings. And so these students who are, yes, generally younger, maybe 18-year-olds that are showing up, 26-year-olds that are showing up, of course they bring their whole selves. And so not just, oh, look at what we have to offer. We're much like a parish setting. It's just it's completely different, except in all of the ways that it's the same. So, for instance, on Sundays for downtown, if you were a college student that moved or that is studying somewhere in Lower Manhattan and you came to Canterbury Downtown, then you could show up on a Sunday at Grace Church on 10th and Broadway. What's happened over the decades is that a downtown parish, usually somewhere along 10th Street, along the avenues, has offered the bishop an office for the Canterbury Downtown Chaplain to be and to have a space. And to have, for instance, like I have my grandmother's love seat sitting there for the student to sit in, and then I've got, it wouldn't fit in my apartment. I don't know if I'd put it there, but it wouldn't fit up the stairs. So they have a place to go, and then there's a 6 p.m. service that is built into Grace Church already, and so there's an altar guild team where students make they're welcomed into the parish setting. And also, then we have, and I'm on the rota for that 6 p.m. service with Grace, and then we have a meal afterwards, and we share time until about 9 p.m. So a lot of folks say, like, well, how come you aren't in church every Sunday morning doing something? And it's because I usually say, well, I work the 3 to 11 shift, and sometimes we're in church on Sunday mornings, and it's a really great, big, long day. You have this. Anyway, there are also midweek things. I gotta say, they change all the time, right? So one semester, maybe it's Fridays in the Global Spiritual Life Center on the 4th floor of the Student Center on Washington Square South, and we have a Bible study. One of the students about 2 years ago named it "Surprised by Scripture," and you've got your sandwich boards out, and then the next semester everything changes except the mission of the church. So I wonder if that might just be my starting bit. It's such a privilege to be. I was a chaplain for 5 years. My second year out of seminary, I was at Seaman's Church Institute over at the Port of Newark and New Jersey. A lot of churches in the Diocese of New York support that ministry, and it feels very similar because it is about the people. I mean, I did love to get a tour of, the deck and the engine room, but it wasn't my job to understand how the engine worked. It was my job to be available for the engineers. And so it's the same, it's different, it's good to be here, and passing the mic.
Thank you.
I didn't really talk about, the climate, but I guess it's good to be.
We'll get
yes,
there. We'll get there.
It's warming.
It is. And we're there no matter what.
Yeah, true.
Pass.
Good morning to you all. My name is Ryan, and I am Megan's uptown counterpart. Megan said I should say something really boring about the history of campus ministry, and I'm going to take her up on that challenge. So feel free to take a nap for the next 15 or 20 seconds. At the end of the Second World War, I'm not kidding, we had a lot of military chaplains. The National Church had seen it as its obligation and mission to pay for them. And as all of the soldiers began to come back at the end of the Second World War, they all, because of the GI Bill, didn't go into the workforce for the most part. They mostly came back into higher education. And so in its wisdom, I would say, the National Church thought, well, let's just send the chaplains with them. We don't have any parishes for them to go to. And so the National Church created a process of having campus chaplains, sometimes called Canterbury's, a name that has stuck in some place and not others, and that has some of its own history. In the Episcopal Church, we have a long history of caring for students, whether through schools and through chaplaincies and through other kinds of ways, whether it's a local parish or anything else. But here was a model that was based somewhat more on the military, on terms of having a clergy person who was available to you if you were a member of the institution, no matter what. It was one of, I think, the most popular things the National Church ever did. It was also really expensive. So in the 1960s, the National Church thought, gosh, this is so great. Everybody loves it. We'll turn this over to the diocese, and they'll be so glad to pay for this. Yes, you laugh. How did you know? And then thus begins sort of the long, complicated slide in history into a much more complex part of campus history. But knowing, I think, some of that kind of basis will help make sense of why in the Episcopal Church and other denominations as well, there are still full-time campus ministers. Because it's this idea that someone should be there to welcome you for this stage of life, that a parish might not be exactly right because you might not be at home in the same way in college that you are, at least for some versions of the way that higher education works in our country. And so, in theory, you all give money to St. Bart's, I hope in practice. But in theory, you all give money to St. Bart's. And St. Bart's, hopefully also in practice, gives money to the diocese. And the diocese does some things that we cannot do as individuals. It funds ministries that are bigger than some particular parish or fill in spots that otherwise wouldn't be. Campus ministry is a part of that in this diocese. So you all pay for us, although you might not think about it that way. I do. Whenever my students say, "Thank you, Ryan," at the end of buying dinner, I always say, no, thank the Diocese of New York. Because I would like them to think about the kind of generosity that supports this kind of work, because it really is generosity. Sometimes it results in the recruiting of or supporting of people who have a kind of vocation. You didn't claim your alum status earlier,
That's
but you
true.
but
I was
you
going to
could.
work it in there.
Okay,
yeah.
but you could. I wasn't there. I had nothing to do with it. So I feel totally confident in saying it was amazing. You all help support that, and that's such a big part of what we do, is be the place that people can go to for spiritual needs of all kinds on campus. For some students who are Episcopalians who are looking for us, it's a relief. For some students who are just wandering spiritually or have all kinds of questions, it's something else entirely. There's a lot of times the first thing I do when I meet with students sometimes who are spiritual and not religious is they just have to discover that I won't bite them. Or that whatever their past trauma is, I'm not interested in perpetuating. It continues to be that the Episcopal Church has always had a special charism for higher education. It's just our natural playground. It's about ideas, and it's about ambiguity, and it's about growth, and it's about relationships. And that is what people are playing with in higher education. So just for fun, I'll even try and segue that to the current moment when everything has felt much more in crisis. And in some ways, this would be my opinion and nobody else's, this crisis has been working its way forward for probably more than 20 years in higher education. How many of you are in higher education? I wanted to ask. Yeah, this has been coming for us for a long time in terms of what the identity of higher education ought to be. Is education just for the elite? What do we do with the fact that something like only a quarter of students who are in higher education go through what we think of as the traditional four-year college? What does this mean for us? And there's the Chronicle and other places have thought about this for a long time, but what has happened over the last 3 years is the temperature has been turned way up. And so all of a sudden the anxiety and the worry. Is higher education about creating deeper citizens and students? Is it just about finding a link to a job? I mean, I have opinions about all of these, but all of this has become very much a part of what we do. So in Uptown, part of what we do is we are, when I arrived there, I asked 3 students, "Why do you come?" They said, "It's the only place at Columbia I make non-competitive friendships." And I thought, that we can do. And so we are a place where people make genuine relationships with each other and with God. So we also have a Sunday evening service. We also have dinner, very normal parts of campus ministry life. We have a service for students, faculty, and staff. Columbia was Episcopal long ago. And so there is still a beautiful university chapel that was designed by Episcopalians. There is a letter in the basement from the Archbishop of Canterbury apologizing for missing the consecration of St. Paul's. But in what I still think of as one of the most sort of revealing sort of things about the way religious life has functioned at Columbia, that letter sits on a frame in a basement, in a corner, hanging on a wall. I mean, it's archival material, and it just is sort of over there. And so some of the joy of getting to do that work there is helping Columbia rediscover its own past. We've regrown a lessons and carol service so that now the whole university comes, and they're all amazed because it's everyone is welcome. Jews and Muslims sing in the choir, and everybody comes because it's joyful, and it's not asking anything else of you. We're not looking for your funding at the end. So there's so much of that life that's about witnessing, that's about welcoming, and that's about representing you all in a space that needs it. So that's more than you needed to know. And thank you for having us. We're so glad to be here.
Thank you both for being here. I wonder if we can start with the students. How are the students? You both had experience pre-COVID, during COVID, and now kind of post-COVID, if that's what we're calling this period. How are students doing? What are they feeling like? What are their joys and challenges and struggles right now?
I could start. I would say that maybe existentially, there's, maybe the whole time that I've ever worked with students, they're stressed out and they're fabulous, And then there's the now. So I would say that mostly Canterbury Downtown has been made up of mostly NYU students, and then, depending on who's looking to be a part of the community, there's the SUNYs and the CUNYs, and there's Cooper Union, and we've got New School. Very different building, even just property setting than Uptown, and so there's been a lot of angst and feeling terrified and feeling grateful for places where they can talk about it. Excuse me. I was surprised. I'm always surprised by how I'm constantly learning to stop when I realize that I'm projecting onto people. And so I would think that students would show up for midweek stuff and for Sunday wanting to talk about something very specific, especially just with as things have progressed over the past several years. And I'm not always right about anything, but specifically about that. There are some students that have said, we want to come here and we want to take that baptismal formation class. And for those of us that have already been baptized, we want to offer ourselves as sponsors. Can we do that? Can we do that? Because we're everywhere else all the time. And what I've found is that the students, and this is maybe a broad answer, the students then also know that they can talk about, well, this was what it was like when there was there was only one day on campus at NYU when there was space that was occupied before it was taken, which is very different than the setup at Columbia. And so to talk about where there's intersection, with the students and where they're coming from, with how they have room to explore. Maybe I don't, it's a wonderful thing, like to so much of what Ryan was saying, to not have to be competitive in a space of chaplaincy, where they can come and not have to know. If I've heard a student say, well, I would argue that, and then they stop because they're not in class. They don't have to argue a point. They can actually figure things out. So broadly speaking, because that's more, I feel like I'm having a broader experience. I do have relationships with faculty mostly and staff at NYU. I have found, though, that there are many things that they don't. It's a different setup. I'm not really invited into the conversations, and so any of the ones that I have been invited into are in a pastoral context. But that's its own gift. So I have found that the students surprise me constantly about what they say that they need and want, and then we shift uptown.
I would say, thinking of students, that I appreciate your and also share in your desire not to project. Because the truth is there's so much free-floating anxiety among not only higher education but all of us presently that it's very easy to do that. I would say, from what I see, that it is an absolutely nightmare of a time to be an international student. It is. It's just, especially if you don't have citizenship status or however, and that's different for different people. And I will say, it is very different to be an international student here from Palestine or from Israel, and Columbia famously has students from both, than it is to be from China. Students from China have a little more sort of, this is broadly overgeneralizing, but they have experience working with regimes where it's not okay to say things. And so they have a way of negotiating some of those spaces in a very different way than other kinds of students. Currently, I think everyone is watching in horror because the rules change literally week to week for what is required for a student visa. And I think the reality is we're coming to a time in the next year when we really will not have many international students. This will cause huge financial problems in higher ed, and I won't opine about all of that at the moment. But so one question is, which students? Another question is, one of the things that I'm fascinated by is the start of the term is always very smooth because everyone's got to get back to class. Everyone wants to learn. It's why everybody's there. Everyone wants to meet new friends and build connections, recruit new members to their groups, all of these kinds of things. And so the start of the term is always, there's a kind of optimism in the fall in the academy that I live for, I think is really lovely. And that is still present. Columbia has always been a very anxious place, probably too anxious. It's more anxious, I think, than its Ivy peers. And that is still true. That is still continues to dog and has made a very toxic student culture there for a long time. That is still true. Columbia used to have an open campus where everyone in the neighborhood could come and stay and stop and see people. It's now been 2 years, so now half of the undergraduate population doesn't remember that used to be true, that you didn't have to come through private security, who vary widely in terms of their quality. Public safety is a different conversation. A lot of them build relationships with students, but private security, not so much. So in that sense, it's created a very different feel on campus. The students would comment that the university puts lots of distracting carnival events in the middle of campus during times of high anxiety, so that maybe people won't notice that the preschoolers no longer play on campus and the old people no longer sit on the benches. I say all of that just to paint something of a picture of just how diverse it is. There are a lot of students who just showed up to college and are really excited, and they're trying to figure out their major, and one day they want to go home and make money. They want to meet people and have their minds changed. I have students who are screaming in protest and engaging in actions around it, sometimes not so much about the war as about selling out, about taking their Ivy League education and working for the very things they've learned about the injustice of. I have, sometimes I joke that my job as a chaplain is to slowly entice away people from Wall Street. And those that I can't entice away, I say, well, you could use your money for good and not for evil. But there's a certain amount of self-reflection and advocacy that's a part of that work. So the truth is, I think students are kind of all over. But there are places where there's just incredible loss, and I think there's more impending loss coming. And what that's going to look like, none of us know.
Free speech in so many ways has been a topic talked about in terms of campus culture. I wonder what issues of free speech look like for your students on the ground. Is it something they're concerned about from a day-to-day basis? How does that issue play out for them?
I think the way that the first thing that comes to mind is just a very specific situation where right before commencement this past spring, individual students, but a couple in particular would share that some words, in their closing up of getting, conferred their degree, whatever it is that they're required to put forward, to their college. They've been flagged. They've gotten a notice from a certain office at their college, and they're going to have somebody come and pay attention, to what they're, to what they're publishing, and how absolutely, can we take a walk? Can we take a walk somewhere else? Can we maybe go far away? Worried about somebody hearing them, and I've not experienced that to this degree before, and so that I feel like that's something, we say any number of things. I think about just the very small, one at a time instances where folks all of a sudden are just absolutely terrified that everything that they've built for could go away because of who they've been formed to be, and to have to think that there's really just only, we have to just say, it's sort of maybe like going through, it's okay to say, going through the ordination process, right? Like, wait, what what is it that I'm supposed to say? I remember that I got to hang out, and then I got to hang out with the folks that were running the Scantron through the MMPI with the psych eval for the ordination process, and they said, hey, do you want to see the chart, of the interfaith folks that there's just a chart, you can't see any personal information of how you guys sort of score. And I said, yeah, I do. And so he was like, look at this. And I mean, there was very little derivation, and I just thought, wow, isn't that fascinating that very similar people are called to this specific kind of order of ministry? And he said, no, you just all say the same thing. And and I thought, okay, I mean, and sometimes, and that's just an example of how I identify with being terrified, with being scared that maybe, maybe it's not coming from the institution directly. I don't think that the Commission on Ministry and the bishop and the lay and ordained leaders are looking to scare people, and then there are institutions and power structures that are. So my experience is on a kind of micro level to share and then pass the mic. Just the fear of losing everything in the United States from wherever they came, and losing everything. That's not why we show up in our lives. So.
I guess I'm inclined to say that speech has not felt very free for a while. I think that's just been the case. However, whether we want to think about free speech as retaliation by the state, because the state has retaliated both against Columbia as the institution and against particular students, or whether it's individuals. When the protests began, there were many people who parked just sort of doxing trucks. There were trucks with just pictures of students and their personal information along the sides of campus. There have been students who have been denied work or lost jobs trying to graduate for political statements. And it's enormously complex, partly too on Columbia's campus. At Columbia, this may be helpful background too, the oldest fight, at least in my time at Columbia, is on the question of the status of Palestine. What should be the status there? That has been a toxic fight every year for a very long time. And so when which is missing from the wider national context. So when this exploded, I'm sure it was a fight during your time. Everyone already came loaded for bear. And so it meant that there were absolutely peaceful, witnessing, very beautiful protests. There absolutely were anti-Semitic things said. Absolutely. Both things are true. And how we weigh those and what that looks like is something the university has, I think, not really risen to the challenge of dealing with. And it's been made much worse. I do quote the Dean of Religious Life, who said this once. He said, it's sort of like everyone at Columbia is no further than 10 feet away from a microphone. I love saying that into a microphone. It's my favorite. But it's that so that every fight that happens at Columbia seems to get magnified. And the university itself has been not very skillful in negotiating that. And so what that's meant is that I'm not sure, I don't want to say, oh, there's no free speech at Columbia, because that sounds very dire. But I think everyone can very clearly see the writing on the wall in terms of what the costs have been of speaking and saying various kinds of things. And I have no idea what the future of that looks like. For all the reasons that we're talking about. Everyone is still trying to figure out. The tragedy, of course, is that in college you would love for faculty and for students to be able to try on an idea, to be able to talk about it, and there is less and less space for that. That for my money, that's where universities in general have really struggled to live into their own sense of vocation, as a place where these things can be worked on without being punished.
Part of the nature of campus ministry is that there's an interfaith component, that you all have counterparts who represent other denominations, but also other faiths. And both anti-Semitism and Islamophobia have been brought up in the last few years in terms of campus environments. And I wonder if you can talk a little bit about what it's like to work with chaplains from other faith traditions and how they're feeling about the current climate.
I mean, if anything, they're more diverse than we are. I'm thinking about my Muslim colleague and friend who is at Columbia. And as the Muslim coordinator at Columbia, he works with Muslims from all over the world. And they are as unruly as Christians. They don't all think the same things and have different kinds of ritual practices, and they think each other are idiots. And he is the person designed to be their teacher and pastor. He has plenty of work to do as it is. And so it's been double tough, I think. It's been double tough for them because, in his case, he's paid by the university. And so he feels the need, if he decided to criticize the university roundly, they would just fire him and find somebody else. So what does he do to take care of the actual needs of his students when Islamophobia is a real presence on that campus? And on Columbia in many ways is a very Jewish campus. There are so many Jewish voices on Columbia. At Columbia, it becomes one of the things that annoys me about watching the news is that sometimes people come to a microphone and act as though they're the Jewish voice at Columbia, and I think, I doubt it. I doubt it. There, too, I mean, I'm thinking of Hillel, which is the largest gathering of Jewish students at Columbia. My colleagues there work, again, very hard. And the Hillel at Columbia is unique in that it was designed as a Hillel to be the single Jewish gathering point for Orthodox, conservative, and Reformed students, as well as Reconstructionists. So they already have plenty of differences in that crowd, and they're somewhat used to that. But then how do rabbis and community coordinators, how do they, with integrity, work in that space? It's been tough. And I would say, the only other thing I would say anecdotally is I have wanted to find some way to be supportive sometimes, and that has been hard because it is not a time you are inclined to trust other people. And that's tough because I, if anything, would probably choose to be even more supportive of them as humans doing what seems to me to be a very hard thing.
Yeah, I think about so at NYU where I have access to the campus in a kind of a bigger way than any other campuses right now. There's the Center for Global Spiritual Life under Student Affairs, and there are about 71 of us right now that are vetted to be spiritual life advisors, and I think about 63 of them are different denominations of Christianity or non-denominational, but with an ecclesiastical endorsement of some kind so that we can get in the door, we get our little badge and have access to students, faculty, staff spaces, and to be there so even just, and then the other maybe 9-ish spiritual life advisors we've got somebody from ethical culture. We've got maybe 4 spiritual life advisors from different Jewish traditions, and there's a Muslim chaplain for Islamic life that works for NYU. And he just left, so there's a new one. So Imam Khalid and Rabbi Sarna, who also worked for NYU, they made a movie together with their families, with their spouses and children, and have been working on building community, multi-faith, for over a decade. And you can find it. I forget what it's called, but it's only on YouTube right now. But there has been turnover there with staff. The work that folks are doing, wondering how to be supportive, kind of can feel very, very trite. I think those personal relationships. I remember when we were, when the head rabbi from Central Synagogue was on the cathedral steps on July 1st, on Dean Varghese' first day up at the cathedral. There's the bishop and the new dean and people from all backgrounds. But she talked about how Bishop Matt here in our diocese gave her a call. Just gave her a personal call, and she shared that openly. But that was her private information. The personal relationships are the ways that we can support each other. Sometimes it's with the microphone next to each other at a big thing, and a lot of the times it's not. But I think there's so much frustration that the students have shared with me around. Well, how do we? We're not the same. Students together from all kinds of backgrounds saying we're not the same, and we don't feel like we're, unity doesn't mean uniformity, but it just feels so scary. It feels so scary to maybe speak for each other. I think folks are just really, really reticent, and that's just a mild word, to to try to express something. Nobody wants to speak for anybody else out of a really lovely place, and then maybe nobody's talking. That's been my experience down there. Is there's very little that folks want to go on the record about. It's very different than maybe somebody 10 feet from a microphone is gonna. It doesn't take that many seconds to get there. Not that many folks have been speaking into the mic in my context, and that feels terrible. And so, when we're given a chance in our own settings, to just be public about being in relationship, to be public about maybe not speaking for one another, but sharing our platforms. But yeah, it feels the emails that go out from the administration. I would love for them to say something. That's it, yeah.
So we have a few minutes for your questions. If you're here in the room, you can raise your hand. Brian Johnson will come around with question cards and bring those up to me. You can also email me your questions, pthompson@stbarts.org. And if you're watching us on the live stream, you can type your questions into the live chat on YouTube or the comments on Facebook. While we're waiting for the questions, students' spiritual lives. There's been a lot of press recently about Gen Z being more religious and seeing increased religious engagement. We're seeing that a little bit here at St. Bart's. I wonder, on campuses, do you feel that among students? Are students showing an increased interest in the church or in other religious traditions that is noticeable to you all?
Yes. Although, I mean, an interesting thing about campus ministry is that sometimes I think it's a canary in the coal mine. This is a conversation campus ministers have been having for about a decade. It just is the case that many people are now growing up either so unchurched they don't know anything about it, or they are wanting to deal with the trauma of the religious background in a different way, or maybe they had a great experience and they want to move forward. But I mean, there's a sense in which, I think that's a bit. That has certainly been my experience. Is that there was a sense 20 years ago when I was an undergraduate that you would never, you'd invite friends to church, really? I felt embarrassed to invite my roommates when I was preaching at my campus ministry. My students bring friends to church all the time. Something has really changed in us culturally. Can I imagine my parents or my grandparents inviting other people to church? No, I cannot. Something has really changed, and it's not as simple as I don't have the right language for it, but it's not as simple as like the spiritual muscle has regrown, but there's actually just something that's changed not only in our culture in terms of what we feel comfortable expressing, but how we do that in a community, and that is part of what has changed in Gen Z. Or what is changing in whatever, I hate generational studies, but whatever we mean by the current group of people that are growing up in the way that they're growing, they don't feel as weird about talking to someone about church.
Yeah, I think, so yes would be my answer too. And I think my experience has been, especially, maybe breaking people up. I mean, we do that in society I'm just barely Gen X. Proud. Well, actually, I'm not proud because that's one of the things about Gen X. We don't really care or know, and we don't. And
yeah. And you're all just barely Gen X, really.
Yeah. But no. Well, yeah. I think I don't even know when the year starts. That's how Gen X I am. But the folks that are I mean, the students that are the Gen Z or, the Zoomers, ooh, if you call them that. And we have any right here? Okay, on the internet. I don't call them anything except because I remember, well, even now I don't like to be told who I am, and so it's been really fun to have folks, kind of to your question, and to say, that students they're very comfortable overall sharing with. I mean, I'm going to say the words together. Social media, like with social media, there's an excitement to share, and so that's something that maybe is a positive. They don't like to be told, just so you know that their brains are different than ours, and so I don't say that either. And I actually, but that the sharing bit kind of lends to the spirit of what I hear you saying too about inviting people to something that is important to a student that comes to Canterbury, for instance. And so it's really been fun. Well, even when your Thursday night Imagine worship here, there was a huge somebody that has a big TikTok following. A bunch of Canterbury students came during the summer that were in town and invited their friends to come and see Father Lizzie. And so I wonder if if media hadn't changed at all, that these folks would still maybe be infused with the kind of enthusiasm they have to share parts of their lives that maybe in the 50s or even in the 80s I was not kind of encouraged to share or invite. There's just an excitement about there is an openness, I feel, with students who say, like, hey, come with me, and I identify with the embarrassment part of and you don't have to. There's I would apologize maybe even if I got the guts to invite someone to come to be a part of a community or experience it. There's a little bit less apology with these folks. I love that. It really helps. It helps me with my own spiritual journey. Do you ever I find a lot of our time is thanking the students for the gifts that they bring, reminding me why I'm here in the first place.
All right, we have several questions. One is about fear. You all have talked about the fear in your students for various reasons. This person wonders, what can you do to help manage the fear? And I guess I'll add to that, is it your role to manage the fear?
I'm thinking of a CPE supervisor I had a long time ago. Fear is a future-focused emotion. And sometimes it helps. The thing that strikes me about the question is that it's helpful to be clearer about what we're afraid of. It really helps to, I don't want to sound too new agey, but naming the fear really helps. So, part of our role is creating spaces, I think, where students or faculty and staff can name those fears. Sometimes if you can name them, you realize that it's not all happening to you and it's not all happening at once. I tell my students these days, anecdotally, for example, that every student I've had who graduated about a year out is less anxious, worked out some sort of romantic problem, has a better idea about what they want to do when they grow up. There's still a sense in higher education that you by the time you're a senior, you'll have it all worked out, and you will have some classmate, I guarantee, who's already published, is streaming on Spotify, and is got a job at one of the big consulting firms. So there's this constant sort of comparing in that sense. So recognizing those fears, I think, is really helpful. And I do think that is part of what we do, is creating a space where you can ask those questions and realize that it might turn out they're not so scary or they don't matter so much, and becoming clear about the ones that do matter and how you might actually do something about them to make that in a different way.
Yeah, I identify with the church inviting us to, be catapulted into the present, over and over and over again, from that future facing. I think that I was lucky, and it was I grew up Roman Catholic, but I went to a non-denominational campus ministry group when I was in college in just south of Jacksonville, Florida, in the 90s. And I just remember, you know, I mean, I've taken with me, you said like a year out, and I feel like, you know, I just have so many touch points back, even the parts that I don't identify at all with, that I felt so connected to, you know, 30 some years ago. I feel like I've been given tools because of the different communities I've been a part of, all the way up until now. And so I think a lot of where I spend my time and maybe where I take my own fear is to catapult myself into the present with who's in the room and naming, you know, what is it? I was thinking about singing hymns when you were talking, you know, just about the theology that's in our different hymnals, you know, and yesterday I was at a wedding and we were singing, and I was just moved to tears, probably for a lot of reasons, but the church is this container that has been, you know, it's built to hold. It's built to model that God can hold everything, and so that is something that I feel like it really does come through for students, because of what we have to offer is well, no matter what, it can be held here, and then if it can be held, then maybe I can, you know, take some action, and especially on behalf of, right, like, kind of understanding that it's not all happening to me, and it's not all happening at once. Thanks for that. Yeah.
Someone wonders, who are your students reading? What ideas and thinkers are most captivating them at this moment?
Only their assignments presently. and those as little as possible in order to pass the discussion question. That's a great question. I would say, and this is a function of just some of who Columbia is. Columbia is somewhat famous for its fairly, strict is not the right word, but focused undergraduate education, meaning that there's a whole series of great books that one is required to read as an undergraduate at Columbia. A lot of them actually really are great books. And one of the things that I really like is I've read a lot of them. And so I would say one of the things that students are reading is what they're assigned. I have spent a lot of time talking about Dante over the last 2 years. I have spent a good bit of time talking about Plato. I have spent a good bit of time talking about some of these kind of classic texts. I had a student 3 years ago who said, "You've never read Walden Pond?" So I had to read Walden Pond. And we had a wonderful discussion about it. I always tell my students, don't threaten me. I will read what you want me to read, and we can talk about it. It's one of the joys, actually, of getting to be a college chaplain is the ability to really engage these ideas. So I would say there's a sense in which, particularly from the undergraduate side, but also from the graduate side, the work is so demanding that they're mostly not reading public intellectual articles. They, like me, skim past the different font of the editorial columns in the New York Times to move on to something else, because they're just trying to get a sense about what's happening. So a lot of what they're reading is what they're supposed to. It so happens that those turn out to be really prescient at the moment. I've had a lot of conversations about Hannah Arendt in the last 3 years and totalitarianism. These have been some of the kind of perennial thinkers who exist in the curriculum, but all of a sudden have a lot to say in our moment. So I would say a lot of it is predictable, but also it turns out really important. So
just a little bit to add that's a little different, because my goodness, yeah. The Strand bookstore is just 2 blocks north of Grace, and so sometimes, especially if I'm out of my stock of Rowan Williams's Being Christian, people, they love that book, because I feel like a lot of students are like, wait, how do I do this? And also, how do I do this without feeling upset with myself or upsetting other people? That, you know, really, truly, like, what does it mean to be, I don't want to, you know, coming out as Christian is something that students talk about a lot. And so to have, to look at theologians that talk about, well, actually, this is, so they love that perspective. But also sometimes we just wander around the basement of the Strand in the religious section because they are exhausted and from reading their assignments and also tired of the press. And so we go down there and see what's available. But I'm telling you, and a lot of Henri now, and just loving that guy, and the shortness of the book with just as much. It's a huge meal in a small package, and then we can talk about it.
So we're way over time already. Very quickly, as a final question, where do you see hope in your work, in your students?
I see hope in that these folks are wanting to be Christian. They want to follow this living Christ that they hear about. And when they come to church, when they spend time together, when they're on purpose in a religious life space, people that want to follow the person of Christ and are really looking, and also excited about learning about how to connect with other people. That's it. We're over time. I think what I want to say is that I'm so excited to be reminded of the fire that has been in my belly over following Jesus over the decades. It ebbs and flows sometimes. I'm sorry. I hope that's okay to say. And so just excited about folks wanting to learn through experience, of being Christian. Something else.
Yeah, I would say my hope is remarkably similar, which is probably not that surprising. We've both indicated that one of the great joys of this work is the communities that we get to work with, because they're so delightful and interesting. And it is hard to feel quite so down about everything when you see the kind of passion and love that is in the lives of students and of faculty and of staff. I mean, it just is. I mean, to do this kind of work and to think that Jesus has something to do and to speak in this moment, kind of again and again and again, it's invigorating every time, I would say, at least for me. And so the hope continues to be remarkably the lives of these people and the way that what Jesus said still resonates inside people's hearts and minds, and the way that really carries people forward and changes how they see where they are in the world. It's a delight.
All right, we'll have to leave it at that. Please join me in thanking Ryan and Megan. We hope you'll stick around, whether in person or online, and join us for worship at 11 a.m. And next week, we'll be back for an important conversation about Alzheimer's and dementia. See you then.